Call to order of the Affordable Housing Collaborative, meeting on Thursday, February 27th, 2025. Roll call. Bethany Sorrentino.
Megan Sparks.
Amy Crawford.
Pete Swain.
Josh Port.
Richard Morrissey.
Sue Mittendorf.
And Brian Wagner for the Planning Department.
Okay, we'll move to item 3, approval of minutes. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes from our last meeting? And I'll open it up for any corrections or comments.
They look good to me.
Okay. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve and second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Who was the second?
Sue. So I also realized, I know this is so formal, speaking into the microphones for the first time, but I haven't even met Peter, so I want to say hi. Here's what I want to do, because we did briefly introduce ourselves last time, and because I want to run pretty tight to the time frame that we sort of have, I'm going to ask us to think about something that we will discuss on one of these. I think it's number 9. But what I want you to think about, and this is going to be by way of your introducing yourselves to our group here, is if you could think of an SK housing story that you have personally experienced. So it could be something that happened to you or happened to somebody that you know that made you want to be on this committee. So think about sort of like a why did you want to join the committee, but tell it to us as a housing story from South Kingstown, either you or someone else. So we'll think about that for the next bit as we go through the agenda, and then we can do a little kind of get to know you quick at the end as we move down the agenda. So we have approved the minutes. We will move on to item 4, correspondence and public comment.
I do not have any correspondence, and there is no members of the public here to comment.
Hopefully soon we'll have plentiful members on the live stream. Okay, let's see. So new business, number 5A, preparation for annual meeting with council, discussion for annual meeting with council. So we came up with 4 bullet points last time, and Megan very kindly agreed to mock up a presentation. So Megan, I think I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the best way to give us the outline or the framework, and then we can kind of plan after that.
Okay, so I printed it out. Yeah, so I have all these slides we printed out. And when I transferred it, I used the Canva, and then when I transferred it to PowerPoint, it got a little bit, discombobulated. So I definitely have to go back and, make the slides, and I didn't do spell check. So this is definitely rough draft. So from what we discussed, we did just a main slide, then listed all of our members. The 4 topics that we talked about were doing the current state of housing in South Kingstown, the Horsley Witten work, Union Studios work moving forward, and then transit orient development. So for the housing overview, I left it blank for now, but the plan was to put in some of the main things from the Housing Network Rhode Island, which basically says the median sales price for last year was $561,000. You need $180,000 to afford it. I will go look in the real estate data as well and see what the median price is now. Last time I did it, it was much higher. I want to say it was like $650, so it's only increasing. So I'll get some real estate numbers and put those in there too. And then also wanted to talk about the affordable housing units that we have in South Kingstown. And that would be kind of what the plan was for that slide. Is there anything that you think that we need to add to that? That would be relevant?
So actually, can I, Brian, ask you to clarify, are we still planning to give the town council like a virtual folder of documents? So there was the summary that you had prepared, there was possibly like the Rhode Island fact sheet. So are we still planning to do that, or should we think about this as like a paper-free presentation to them?
So the manager's office puts together materials for every council meeting. I have the ability to upload electronic materials into that folder. I do believe they are distributed electronically to the council members. I would very strongly recommend that you be judicious in your choice of anything you want to upload to them. If you overwhelm them with too much material, you may get them to read nothing. So if you want to give them a few quick bulleted things to help them follow along with your presentation, I think that's absolutely a good idea.
I think last time we talked about doing the one sheet about the Horsley Witten, right? So that was we were going to give them, I think, the letter that we discussed, right? That we sent to the town council and the planning board. So we were going to include that. Isn't
So-
that what we discussed?
What happened was when I uploaded the draft missing middle ordinance and your letter to the planning board, that's what triggered the realization that we were supposed to be on the last council meeting agenda, and they weren't prepared for us, which is why we got kicked. So I had already uploaded those two things. So they probably were not distributed because you were not on the last agenda, but I had uploaded those things. I can re-upload those things for the next agenda, along with anything else you think is reasonable for them to have.
Are we allowed to make copies in the planning department or something? Because we could just also print out maybe 2 things to hand physically to the 5.
Yeah, I can
Because
make printed
I
handouts.
think of a lot of attachments to read. So the chances of them looking through, I mean, you're correct. Like, you know, if we give them 4 pages, 5 pages, even if it's very valuable information, it would be great if we could just pick 1 or 2 pages and maybe literally hand them out and say, these were in your packet.
I can do that.
Okay. So Megan, what do you think would be the most, like, so if we're going over the housing overview, and I wanted to throw out there how the format, right? So I'm thinking that I am willing to take on the main share of the talking and then sort of call on people for their individual pieces. I do start to talk fast, so feel free to nudge me. And I think it should also be where whoever's talking, you know, if the group has something to contribute, I think we probably should feel pretty free to speak, like not have it be super formal. And then I taught for URI for 15 years, so I'm good at looking at the clock, so planning. So I will do my best to be like the timekeeper and move us along, just so nobody thinks I'm being rude, you know, something like that. So I would, I think, kind of give the introduction with the housing overview. You're thinking, Megan, that we are going to fill something in on that slide, right? Or are we leaving the slide itself blank?
Yes. I was thinking put some of the main
Okay.
points that we want to
Okay.
put up there, and that would be the median price, what percent of AMI we have. I know that there's a question in that, so we can put that up there.
Yeah.
And then I like that sheet that, Brian, you had that I know you already gave them, but that one, yeah. You know, something along those lines.
That they've seen, because I
Yes.
prepared that for the manager to give to the council. So if you want to work off of that, you can work off of that comfortable that they've already seen it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think one thing that I had said in one of the meetings, I can't remember, I think it was when the town council met with Union Studios about, one of the big things we had talked about in our meetings was 55 and older communities and how we don't necessarily think that that's what should be done, but I wanted to show the data on that. So I've been looking at the data based off of what you had and all that, and then gone through different things. So I'll come up with a plan to just add that in there and how it's the percentage of 55 and older.
We can certainly, like, I know you were worried about maybe it's not fully complete. Like, we can totally caveat that. But I still think even acknowledging that maybe there are like a couple bits of the inventory that might be out of date, like, it seems like a pretty overwhelmingly large amount of over 55 housing. So I think it would still be instructive. Yeah.
I have, I put this together, going through the data from that spreadsheet, Brian, that you have. And I can pass this around, but basically highlighting the different units that we have, and then I broke them into family rentals, 55 and older rentals, disabled rentals, family owner, 55 and older owner, disabled owners, and then unsure. And then I put group home beds as another one. So I think that breaks it out better, because then you know exactly what groups we're talking about. So when you lump in homeownership and rental together, I think that that sometimes gets confusing and might skew the numbers in a way. So I like it better when you have homeownership as one, and then rental as another, and then you break it out by age. Because it very clearly, this points to what we've talked about a lot, is that there is no family, there are family rentals, but single units in town. That doesn't exist. So I think they need to know that, although I know we've said it several times, but, okay, so I'll work on that. And Brian, I'm thinking I'll make these, when is our meeting? Not next Monday, but the Monday after, right? Okay, so I'll make these and make sure that by this Monday they're done, and then you can maybe send them out to everybody. And then if then, at that point, people want to comment, and then we'll be all set for that. Anything else we want to add to that slide?
I think it was great.
And I would like to point out that this house here is for sale right now, the highest price, yes, on Torrey Road. I think it's 6.5 million, 6.49. Yeah, it's very nice. But, okay. So moving on, Horsley, Witten. So I just put down a couple things. I don't know if we want to not have as much detail. I know we don't want to overwhelm them with things, but I just said that in 2017, the town gave affordable housing $100,000 to have Horsley Witten draft a missing middle ordinance. From this, the town adopted the cottage zoning. Multiple attempts to get the planning board to review the ordinance, and we have gotten no feedback, and it's gone nowhere. So that's one of the things we want to talk about here. And if we could, we sent a letter to the planning board and the town council in 2023, requested a joint working session to review the ordinance, and we did not receive a response. So I think, like we talked about last time, one of our goals is to see if we can get some movement on it, and if the town council can, the planning department or the planning board has already reviewed the ordinance, correct? Because there's notes on it.
So the planning board has been sent the ordinance.
Right.
They have talked about it in 2 or 3 meetings. It has never been voted on. So for those people who are not familiar, any change to the zoning ordinance has to go through the planning board, and the planning board has to make an advisory recommendation to the council. The council, as the legislative body, gets the final say on any changes. They can disregard a negative recommendation by the planning board or a positive recommendation by the planning board and make their own decision. But we have not had any vote on a recommendation come out of the planning board at this point.
Can I just confirm, we have gotten no response? I just want to be careful about saying that if...
Well, you did get a response, because they did have a meeting after you sent that letter. It was several months after you sent the letter. They had a meeting. It was discussed. No decision was made. And we've attempted to try and get it placed back on the agenda, and I don't think it ever officially got back on the agenda. There were a couple of discussions that arose out of other agenda items about the missing middle ordinance. But again, in those instances, it wasn't even on the agenda for a vote, so they couldn't have voted if they wanted to.
But when you talk about, they talked about it months later, did we know that? That was on the agenda?
No, I'm saying it was never...
So it's never been on the agenda?
No, it was placed on the agenda once, formally, at a work session.
Did you go?
I was sort of thinking that if you want to clarify that a written response to us or even a verbal response to us, but I think they did have a response in that they put it on the agenda. But that I think it's important that it wasn't, to note that, there was no vote. But I think that they put it on their agenda is we probably should consider a response, but just not it's
'Cause
not
But was
that's
enough.
what-
anyone?
Not one to us.
But
That's
yeah,
what
but was
you-
anyone from our department at that meeting? Like, did we even know that that was going on? Did someone go?
Yeah, it's been a while. It's ringing a bell. I seem to remember them. I seem to remember being at a meeting where it was discussed, and just yeah, it's been a while. But yeah.
There was not any sort of movement toward resolution. It was, from my recollection.
So I have a couple language suggestions, and then I want to hear from,
I just have one,
Yeah, go
do we know
ahead, Richard.
what period of time we're dealing with in this window of when it was originally created and
Well, yeah,
when it got reviewed? I'm trying to get a sense, are we talking about years? From
Yes.
when the planning board and the town council has seen it to where we are today?
yes.
Okay.
Because that original, so we knew that the missing middle had not been acted on by the planning board for a while before we sent a letter, and that letter was sent while I was still chair, and Megan's already been chair for a whole year.
Okay.
So it was probably fall.
We can
maybe.
look at the date.
Oh, that's true.
The only reason I ask
Yes.
that is because I think maybe that window of time might be worth noting, like number of months or years with no action, and it's
Yeah.
time we do something. Not necessarily to be
And you did put down
accusatory,
the
but
year,
just kind of like, all right,
2023.
we've had this for a while.
Yeah.
If we're going to make a difference, we can't respond, it can't be
Take years
years to
to
take
respond.
response.
Well, we can, so I can look back at the exact dates, because we have the letter.
we're planning to give them the letter,
We're going to
too.
give them the letter, yes, because, yeah. So we'll give them the letter, so we have the date on the letter, but the exact dates of when we did when the ordinance, when we hired them, when it was released, what was it?
2017.
And the ordinance was then, what's the date on that, though? 2017 as well?
2023 is when we sent them.
No, I know, but
Okay.
what was the date when the ordinance was written?
So we say that in 2017, we paid to have the ordinance written by consultants. So I assume they worked on it in 2017 and produced it in 2017, because that's when we paid
Okay. Yeah.
$100,000. Can you explain, though, Megan, so it says the town adopted a cottage zoning. How is that part of the missing middle ordinance?
It was, so this is all just for everyone. This was before, I'm the oldest person here, and this was before I even started. So this is all just from what Brian has said and what my conversations with other people who've been on the committee, so, yeah.
So I would just like to explain, the contract with Horsley Witten was not to draft a missing middle ordinance. The contract with Horsley Witten was to prepare some draft ordinance revisions to assist in the development of affordable housing. And they started out working on cottage zoning, because it was something we did not have in the ordinance. Seemed to be a popular trend. The cottage development in East Greenwich had just been built. We had somebody in town who was interested in building one. We also did a draft change to our inclusionary zoning ordinance, which got superseded by changes in the legislature and never introduced. There was another draft that they did, and I'm drawing a blank on what it was, and then there was the draft missing middle ordinance. So it was part of a whole program to try and develop affordable housing, and there were going to be additional efforts as well, but the town wound up terminating the contract before final completion.
Do we know why they terminated the contract?
I think they terminated the contract because of the interest in moving forward with rezoning in Old Tower Hill Road. So somewhere along the way, the Economic Development Committee was informed that rezoning in the Commercial Highway District was going to be part of the Horsley-Witten contract. It was never part of the Horsley-Witten contract. And they started pushing, and in their defense, they had been pushing for this mixed-use rezoning in the Commercial Highway District for over 10 years. And the decision was made to cut the Horsley-Witten contract short and move forward with other work. So we spent, if my recollection is correct, we spent about $75,000, about 3/4 of the Horsley-Witten money.
Okay, and then so the 25,000, is that still in the trust fund?
That is still in a trust fund, yes. It's
Okay.
in the Affordable Housing Fund.
So the cottage zoning was the first ordinance that came out of that, and then they did the missing middle. The other thing from it, and I don't know if I understand this correctly, but the difference between the missing middle ordinance and the old Tower Hill, or the Tower Hill redevelopment, is that the missing middle focuses on things that are more, 6 to 8 units or 10 units, and then the Tower Hill is significantly larger complexes, right?
So-
Because they don't do the same thing, right? Isn't that?
They don't do the same thing. Missing middle is really aimed at what we refer to as infill development in existing residential zones. So what can you do on vacant property, vacant lots within the residential zones? What can you do on larger properties that may already have a single-family residence on them to improve housing densities? And it does tend to focus on, say, 8 and fewer units or 12 and fewer units. Anything bigger than that is considered large multifamily development.
Because I think one thing that I was confused on in the beginning, and I don't know if everyone else is, but I thought that Tower Hill was going to sort of take over the missing middle, and it's not. So I think that that's what we need to explain to the council, is that it's, even though we're doing the Tower Hill, you can do them simultaneously, right? So it's 2 different ordinances affecting 2 different things. Because I think their question from one of the meetings I watched was that the old Tower Hill was going to sort of take over this ordinance. I think that's how they understood it. I don't know.
Yeah, that seems to be a somewhat common conception, but
Yeah.
really, missing middle is more stuff that can happen now organically within our existing developments. Old Tower Hill Road is a great idea to add mixed use, but it is going to be very large, capital-intensive development that may not happen for decades, because you're going to have the right set of owners who are interested in doing it and economic conditions that make it worth doing it.
So it's fair to say that's a more long-term commitment, right? So I did just pass around something, sorry to overwhelm us with paper, but at the last town council meetings, each town council member submitted their goals and objectives, and they're going to be kind of summarizing them and winnowing it down. And I want to point out that Patty Alley's, Patricia Alley's, one of her goals is the reconsideration of the attached draft missing middle policy that resulted from the $100,000 grant. So there's some growing awareness among the town council that we paid money for this, and it's just passing an ordinance. It's not building on Old Tower Hill Road. Like, it's an easy step. So I think we could definitely say that. And so I understand now better how the cottage zoning is related. Brian, how many applications or completed projects have come from our cottage zoning?
None. I think planning staff really sort of sees a problem in the ordinance that was adopted in that it limited cottage development, I think, to R10 and R20 zones. And we really don't have a lot of empty properties in the R10 and 20 zones that are large enough to put a cottage development on. The original proposal from staff, I believe, was R10 through R40 for those plans. But we have not seen an application yet. We have had a couple of comprehensive permit applications well, not applications. We've had meetings with people interested in doing cottage-style comp permits in R80 zones, which they would be allowed to do because they would be comprehensive permits. They'd be allowed to put aside that R10, R20 restriction. But we have not had anything come in as a regulatorily compliant cottage application.
I'm going to suggest a few language changes just to back off from the no response idea, and maybe we could, I mean, Amy, you put it delicately that there wasn't much momentum towards it. I think that I'll probably ask you to say something like that, just if we'd say we paid for it in 2017, we started, with baby steps, doing cottage zoning, which we've had 0 applications for. And then I think we should say we've made multiple submissions or multiple requests to the planning board to review the ordinance. And maybe
Have we
instead
done
of saying
that,
no
though?
response, say no decision.
Yeah, have we done that, though? Multiple requests?
Through Joe.
Joe brought it up a couple times, he said.
Right. So I'm just saying, do we feel comfortable saying that, yeah?
And I've relayed your interest to the planning director multiple times, and he's the one who sits down with the planning board chair to set agendas. So I've been conveying it up through my chain of command that there is an ongoing interest to discuss it.
I think also something that would be important to include in there is a very specific and direct line that says why it needs to be addressed now. Whether it's because we just talked about, that this is an immediate, something that, people might be able to respond to immediately, in the short term rather than, I don't know.
Okay, we still have a little time to come back to that. Let's
just
talk
one-
about the next slide.
Can I just do one more thing before we
Okay,
leave?
sure.
The letter says 2019, the slide says 2017. So I don't know what's correct, but we should make sure we have that right.
Okay, wait, I don't hear well. Say that again?
So the slide,
yep.
the slide here says when the grant was made, 100,000 K, this says 2019. So Amy, your letter says 2019.
Oh,
So we need to,
Yes,
I'm missing
yes.
my front page of the.
no,
Worcester
and
Register,
that,
so I don't-
and honestly, that was just a number, so it's 2019, okay. But I am going to talk to some of the people who were on the committee prior to all of us being here to get more of a background because they have more numbers. There were also some focus groups that were done, so I have all that data. So they already did focus groups and met with people in the community and have all that information, and that's something that we didn't know until, well, I just found out. But it is valuable information that we should all have. So yes, I'll make sure those numbers are accurate.
Megan, so you're reaching out to past members of the Affordable Housing Collaborative. Do you want to split that up with a couple other members? Maybe have, how many people are you thinking you're going to reach out to? Because we could assign ourselves to.
Well, I was just reaching out to one that I know, but I mean, if other people want to reach out to past ones.
All right, I like the action steps. So if anybody, I think it's a good long-term goal too. Anybody want to look up names of past Affordable Housing Collaborative people? If you know any of them, ask them about their time on the committee and get the intel.
What is it you're trying to get from the previous
So,
members?
well, I didn't realize that they'd already done focus groups, right? That wasn't
Oh,
something that's
okay.
ever been relayed to us, that they did focus groups. So someone who was on the committee showed me the focus groups, who they met with, and all the feedback. So, just from their
Just
notes.
from their own personal
Just from their own
notes.
personal, because they ran the focus groups. So just from their own personal experience.
I'd say one of the downfalls of people coming and going from committees is that, if you have a big changeover at one point, which we really did 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you're starting from the scratch again. So we're recreating stuff we don't need to recreate.
Well, shouldn't all that be in a public record somewhere?
I think it would be on us to go back to the public records and read them, which I guess is sort of what Megan's doing by finding the name of somebody who used to be on the committee and going to ask them the information. I mean, either that or it's reading all the documents that they've attached to all of their minutes and agendas.
How much time do we have?
No,
Right.
Right.
Go out
I
for
mean,
coffee with somebody or read the.
If anybody else wants
Go
to
on
go
Clark
through the
Base.
record, absolutely.
Okay.
And so do we have any sense of why the planning board is dragging their feet? I mean, what is it that they're looking at and saying they don't like about this? Oh, okay.
It's development. In general, it's just building. I don't think the planning board comes from a place of let's build, to be honest. We've had 76 building permits last year in the whole town. So I don't think that, and it takes years to get things built in this town. So I think that they are dragging their feet because they don't want more things built, if I'm being honest.
I think there is a long-term reluctance to change, but I think the more that they hear stories from their constituents and people coming here and standing up and saying, I've grew up here and want to stay here and I can't stay here, please help me. I think that will start to change some of that underlying idea of we don't want to build anything because we don't want the town to change to we all know somebody that wants to live here and should be able to live here, Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Megan, do you want to keep just talking us through as an overview? Or do you want me to?
Okay, so
the
next
Union
one
Studios?
is Union Studios. So again, we can take off any of these things, add anything, but some of the things we've talked about as a group is recommended using a nonprofit developer. We also wrote a letter to the town council addressing that, and that went on file. Recommended rezoning all 3 properties and get them out to bid at the same time. That was, I know, Rich, we had talked about that. You brought that up, which was great. I think that's important because we don't need to go one after another. It just adds more time, so we could do those things. And those could be done simultaneously. So it's not like you have to rezone and then do this. We could do that all at the same time. In Narragansett, what we talked about is their affordable housing trust. They're the Affordable Housing Trust Collaborative, I think is what they're called. They create their own RFPs. So they've put out several RFPs recently, and they put those together in-house. One of the town council meetings that I was at when when Union Studios went there, they talked about next steps, and I remember Councilwoman Alley asked, is part of the fee that we've paid you to do an RFP, and they said no. So I think they're thinking that the next step would be to pay them an additional sum to do an RFP, which I think we could probably do in-house. So that was one of the things we had discussed, and maybe throwing that out there at the meeting. I don't know if we want to do that. And then establishing a clear timeline for decisions and next steps to ensure everyone's on the same page. So that's just something from talking to different people. Brian, maybe you can talk to this more in the planning department, but I think it would be very helpful if the town council had, because they keep talking, in all the meetings I've gone to, they keep talking about, well, what's the timeline? I would like to see, as a resident, I would like to see sort of a timeline. This is what we plan to do here. This is realistically how long this is going to take. And then we have dates that we try to meet. I think that's probably being overly optimistic, but I think it would help everybody, be on the same page.
So I was thinking we could use the fact that, again, Councilwoman Alley said the 2 years. She said in 2 years she wants to have a shovel in the ground. And I was actually thinking, Rich, this would be a good place for us to say, from your experience in the nonprofit building, what's likely to happen in 2 years from where we are now with not having necessarily anything but concepts, what's likely to happen in 2 years, realistically. And so, I don't think we need to belabor the fact that it's probably mostly going to be paper pushing for the next 2 years. I mean, shovel in the ground, I really would love to see that, but how fast would our timeline have to be for it to be shovel in the ground?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of a way to create an urgency around taking multiple steps at the same time versus taking one step at a time. And I think it potentially even creates opportunity for us to have a discussion about zoning and planning and housing, having regularly scheduled joint meetings to move those events forward. Because if you make everything sequential, then it will take, 10 years to put these housing units up. But if we create a body that can act cohesively and everybody can interact on a single topic versus, hand it from month, because if you just look at the monthly schedules of meetings, you have to have 3 to 5 weeks or 6 weeks if you want to get on a planning board agenda in a town. So you have to be a month and a half ahead of that cycle just to get on the next month's calendar or so. And then things can happen there when you get bumped, or then you have to come back again. So the cycle gets very long just by the administrative process. And I think there's ways to simplify that across the different departments in the town so that everybody's moving together and we're not caught up in 9 months of cycle time queue and 3 months of work.
Do you think you could talk to that? Because I think you presented very well, and you explained
Sure.
it. Yeah. I don't know, what do you think?
I think that what you just said, it would be perfect. Yeah.
And I think the other thing is,
It's one of the things that the state's proposing,
yeah,
right? In terms of boards coming together more versus having serial process,
Yep.
just to try to add some more immediacy through it. I'm not saying to shortcut any steps,
right.
but if you bring everybody to one discussion, then you all walk away tonight with the same answer and direction versus taking 4 months to get to that same endpoint.
Well, a lot of the issues that may confront private developers may not be present here because we have the benefit of working with government and institutional land, which does not have a lot of the same restrictions that private property has on it. So the town will have more freedom. There won't be as much pressure from zoning and setbacks and all that kind of stuff. The things that you can't avoid are, A, you're going to have complete applications, and a lot of our time delay in the planning department is sending applications back because people haven't given us a complete application. Again, if we're dealing directly with a contractor on our own project, hopefully a lot of that goes away. The one thing we can't make go away are any of the public notice requirements.
Yeah.
So all of the advertising timelines and everything like that, we are going to have to adhere to, because if we don't, there's going to be somebody out in the community that's going to call us out on it. And that will really lead to delays.
Yeah, and I don't have a sense for what those are, but, your position can help us stay true to what needs to be communicated along that public domain line, I think.
Megan, do you know if the Narragansett Affordable Housing Trust, are they just working on RFPs, or could we go and look at one that they've already done that's completed?
I'm sure they would let us look at theirs. What do you mean, one that they've already done? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes,
So
and
do you
they've
know,
already
so
put
they've
out
completed some, you think, rather than just they're working on it? 'Cause
Oh,
it
no,
would be
they've
great
completed them. Oh, they've already gone out. Yes, they've completed them.
It'd be great to have one in our back pocket
Yeah.
in case it sounds like, well, how can amateurs put it together?
Yeah, no, they've completed them, and I do know that there's other people I've talked to who are more than willing to share their RFPs as well. So I know that we can get access to multiple RFPs if we want, and then we could sit down and kind of pick and choose and put it all together.
I think it would be great to have one with us. Not so much that we want to distribute it beforehand, because we definitely don't want to do that. But if there is any pushback to the idea of, why would you want to, I don't know, write an RFP? Well, see, here, it does happen. So if we could get one.
Okay, so
I have to
I'll
interrupt.
get one, and I'll send it to Brian. He can
great.
send it out.
I just want to interrupt for a second for Brian. I want to ask you, in writing the minutes, I have written, just that we're discussing the details of each slide with clarification and editing. Isn't that enough?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to be sure. Thank you.
All right, let's move to the it must be oriented development. So
Wait, can we just, so this one is okay? The surplus one is okay? We're leaving what's in there?
I have a couple of grammatical corrections, but I can
Yeah.
give those to you
All right,
afterwards.
okay.
Cool. TOD? Okay, awesome. Yes. Okay, so I think I'll give you a little update as we're looking at the slide because I do have a little bit of new information. So I did reach out to the contact person who was listed on the yearly report for the pilot program, who turns out to be the chief of municipal planning and programming at the Rhode Island Department of Housing. And he basically said that they're going to recommend that new money be allocated to the TOD pilot program through the bond. He just said the bond, which I assume means the housing bond that passed in the fall. And he said his best guess, and I can't commit, but best guess is that the regulations will be complete and the program could be accepting applications in the fall. So we, of course, don't have an existing mobility hub. It's going to take a couple years for them to build it, but the program is already going to be up, it seems like, in advance. And I don't have explicit clarity on basically at what point can you claim like I am a mobility hub? Do you need to wait for the day at which the final ribbon is cut and then you're good? Or is it enough for this to be under construction, planned, and you can start moving a little bit of the needle behind the scenes? I would imagine that some of that has to wait for the final wording of all of this. But at the very least, it's something that is coming in the next couple of years. So we could at least, I'm happy to speak to this. We could bring up the sorts of things that are called out in the actual, text of the act that will be, that are going to be required for this district. So the increase in density a certain distance away from a specific regional mobility hub. And I think this was in the year-end report, they mentioned a handful of different criteria that they're likely to use for basically weighing which money gets sent where. And I could call out those handful of things as well. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I can get that straight. So in terms of what's on the slide, I think generally that's perfect. For me, it seems like an obvious win-win where if you need affordable housing in the town, so where are the best places we can put it? And it feels like the no-brainer places to put it are near the transit because that's the place that's set up for high density anyway. It makes the transit run better, and also it's very useful for the people who are going to be living there. So Kingston Station is just such an awesome location for that. And it seems like something that a lot of people agree with. I know Joe's all over that too, on planning. So it seems like, really from my perspective, a slam dunk. The only question is, how much money is actually going to be available for this versus how painful are the concessions in terms of zoning. And we can talk about that, but it feels like at the very least, we want to make them aware of this, so that they can be ready for it as it's coming up, and we can hop on it, because who knows how long the pilot's going to be going, how much money is available. Might as well get to it early. So
I have a question. Are we supposed to call it a transit hub or a mobility hub?
I can look up the specific wording, but I think it was a regional mobility hub, I think was how it, yeah. Brian's giving me a thumbs up.
Maybe it's transit-oriented development and the product is a regional mobility hub.
Yes, I think, that is the entity that you can build your transit-oriented development, or you have your TOD district around. Yeah.
TOD is a very broad generic term that's used nationwide. Regional mobility hub is a term spelled out in the pilot program by the Rhode Island legislature.
Okay, so it would be, the title would be transit-oriented development, and then I would say West Kingston's going to be a regional mobility hub? Is that? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think the only other thing, I don't think this is necessary, I'm just bringing this up in case somebody disagrees with me, is do you think there's any communication we should send about this, about here's the text of the TOD thing if you want to read it, or is it just enough to mention it during the presentation?
I was almost wondering if we should put contact information on the slide itself. If you have questions, reach out to our IDOT person and put their email.
That's fair.
Because don't you have an email address of somebody?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's very publicly broadcasted. It is listed in their year-end report. If you have questions about this, contact this person. So I think that would be totally fair to put in there.
And the other thing we talked about was having them come in, right? So maybe we want to mention that our plan is to bring them in and do a little presentation for us, and we'll let them know when that is if they want to attend.
Yes, and yeah, I think they would be. I haven't specifically asked them about that, but I think they would be very open because that's at least the woman who had done the presentation about the Kingston project seemed very, very willing to answer whatever questions, and I would guess that she would be fine with that. I think if we're gonna commit to like planning this, I should probably reach out like now and just confirm. So I can do that. Like, you know, would you be willing to come in and talk to us? But I would guess the answer is yes. So I think we can tentatively plan on that.
I think you should also mention to her that we are going to give her a shout out in our slideshow during our work session with the town council,
Totally.
just to let her know that we're really on board.
Yes, yeah, I will keep her in the loop
And
on
especially
that.
if she
Yep.
gets more inquiries too, then, you know.
Right. Yeah, I think she'll be excited to hear that. So I will plan to reach out and give the update and see if she's still good to come talk to us. Yep.
So Josh, was there a commercial development component to that becoming a hub as well? I can't recall that. I think I looked at it at one point.
Yeah, my recollection was no. I think, yeah. So take it with a grain of salt because I gotta pull up the regulation again. But my recollection was it was just a density increase that was the main thing that would trigger it. It was within a certain radius away from your regional mobility hub, and it was something like either you raise your density to 10. It was like something like 10 units per acre or something like that, or you increase it by 10 units per acre. I think the idea being if you already had some sort of dense thing, then you would increase it from there. I will say that there was one of these that was sort of more strict, that did not ultimately get passed into law, and there was the less strict version, which is what we have with the pilot program. So I could be jumbling a little in my head, but I think it is linked from the meeting agenda. So
Okay, I'll take a look at it, because it would just seem to make sense that some commercial developer would follow the housing development, and there's
Yeah.
not a lot there right at this point. And that might be a point worth emphasizing, is because people do like to see commercial development along with housing.
yeah,
And so it just seems like that would be a bonus to this in West Kingston.
yeah, I think that's totally fair. And like whether it's explicitly called out in it or not, I don't think it's forbidden. I don't remember
Right.
reading anything like that. So I think I'll double check the actual text of it, but like one way or another, I think that's totally fair to mention. Like we could use this as an opportunity to, yes, add units, yes, increase density, but we could also do it in a way where you get some new businesses in there, get some mixed use activity. Like
For better or worse,
it's-
some people might not want that, but it
Well,
would just
maybe,
seem
but-
that it would sort of follow that along, anyway.
Right, and at least from all of the, the things around Old Tower Hill Road, et cetera, there does seem to be a lot of support in the community for building more spaces like that. So I wouldn't assume that people would be against it. I think there could be some allies there.
I mean, I would just add to that, given that you're out in, outside of town kind of area with, is it NORPAC going in there as well and potentially
Yes.
development there, you're gonna have additional people there that would love, delis and other small businesses that could definitely prosper from that as well. So there's definitely
Yeah.
commercial opportunity that can join that.
That's a very good point. And is that still, like, is that fair to bring up to the council, that like proposed development, or?
So this is interesting because we are, within the next year or two, going to be jumping back into the next round of comprehensive planning, because we released the last one in 2021, but it takes 3 or 4 years to start and finish a comprehensive plan cycle. One of the things that we have discussed as a staff within the planning department is looking at that stretch from, say, the railroad to Plains Road as a potential area to rezone for mixed-use development, and, wouldn't that present a really nice entrance to town from the west coming into URI if it was well done, well-planned and well-zoned?
I mean, I think you'd have the possibility of creating almost a small little walkable community within that if you were really innovative about it. There's the space there to do that, which would be kind of cool. Get off the train, walk to your house, walk to your grocery store.
Love it.
So that would wrap up our topics for them, and it looks like we have our mission statement, which I know that this would normally be at the beginning of a presentation, but I like seeing it at the end because I almost feel like you have more context for what some of these things mean. You know, if you just read it off rambling at the beginning, it's kind of like doesn't land anywhere. So I kind of like it there. Is there anything that you wanted to add about that, or was that just? Okay, so then, and then the final slide would be next steps. I don't know how committed you are to these questions, but I think we should give them specific action steps based on what we've said already. So the questions here are, what do you want us working on? What do you envision our goals to be? And then any questions from them? I think that we should give them maybe like so I wrote down while we were talking, one specific action step would be to hold joint meetings with the town council planning board, you know, like have everybody all at one table when we do some of these more, you know, weighty discussions. Another action step would be to like immediately rezone all of the 3 surplus properties. And another one would be to ask the planning board to vote on the Horsley-Witten ordinance. And we also obviously suggested other things, but I think we could just put those 3 just to also emphasize, like, if you want to take action quickly, there are things that you can do. You know what I'm saying? Like, I like that. And then I do think we should ask them for questions, but I don't think that we should ask them open-ended questions because we're already going to be crunched for time. And if we ask them, what do you envision us working on? You know, we, in some ways, know more about this than them. So we need to say, here's what you should ask us to work on because we can help you with this part. And that's why I like having that mission statement at the end, because all of our instructions are advisory committee, to assist, to advocate for, to assist, you know, so like, let us help you, and here's how we can do it, right? Boom, boom, boom. Any other questions or thoughts, Brian?
So I just, as an overall guidance to this, just to sort of rehash, these work sessions are scheduled for 30 minutes. I've seen a lot of them run over, you know, especially if they get out of an executive session early or whatnot, you may get 40 or 45 minutes out of it, depending on how packed the agenda is. You're really in good shape in terms of coming with a program to give to them, but the whole objective of these work sessions is to get feedback and to have a discussion with them. And if you get into a really good, meaningful discussion with them, go with it. All right? Get information from them, you know, get them excited about the things that we have to work on. I mean, the surplus properties thing is something to be excited about. And I think you're going to get a lot of discussion on the missing middle. That's something to be excited about. The old Tower Hill Road is something to be excited about. These are all good options for creating more forms of affordable and attainable housing in the community. So, you know, just be willing to be flexible and go with what you get presented with at the meeting.
So in that vein, I'd like to ask that, not now, but before next week, we could all read what they wrote for their goals and objectives, because everybody mentions affordable housing, some quite extensively. And so if we can read sort of where they're coming from and maybe provide some information to move them along, you know, that would be helpful. So just make sure you take a look at this before we meet next week with them.
But I agree with you, Bethany, that it would be wise to really have 2 or 3 key topics that we can focus on in that working session, rather than letting it go all over the place, and just say, this is what we're really interested in. We'd love to talk with you guys in depth about these 2 or 3 things.
That idea of talking in depth actually, just sort of in contrast to what you're saying, Brian, if we end up having an extended discussion about something, then I'm afraid like we're not going to get to other important things. We have so many important things. So I just wonder if there's a way to sort of frame it like, you know, we want to get all these ideas out on the table, and we can talk about them more individually. I don't know, or you can, I don't know. The other thought, just before I turn off my mic, is that, you know, when you talked about the joint meeting, one of the things that Rich said is on a regular basis, because joint meetings, you know, they can just go months in between, and I think it should just be on a very regular basis. Yeah.
I mean, maybe the way we look at this is the presentation part is less than 10 minutes, right? Just, we keep to the points, but we use this very last slide as our 3 asks or whatever, and let that center the remaining conversation with the town council. So we kind of summarize into the very last page of, I mean, Beth, you had 2 good points. I didn't get the third one, but I think having 2 or 3 bulleted points that are important to us for moving forward, if we get them rallied around that after we give them the background, then I think it still gives us plenty of time to talk.
So to that end, maybe each person that's doing these slides should really think about how many minutes they take with each slide.
I was just thinking the same exact thing.
I was honestly thinking one person just walks through the slides, right? Not keep changing hands on it, because
So
that'll take
Oh, but I
20
had the
minutes.
impression that Josh was thinking about the transit-oriented development piece. We don't have to do it that way.
So I think that only when somebody has the most expertise on something, so Josh actually brought the transit-oriented design thing, but here's what I think we probably should do. I will actually look at this and assign a goal time, like this is how I do my lecture notes. And if it seems like having one voice initially is better, then I'll say that. And what I might do is just ask a very specific question to whoever is, so I'll ask Josh specifically about the transit-oriented design. But I also will give us a little, we'll come up with a signal that night for, stop talking. And on that note, are there any other thoughts on this presentation? What's our timeline for getting our comments onto the paper, Megan?
Okay, so I said I will take this home and then work on it and then get it to Brian with all of the info that we just got. Send it to Brian, and then he can send it out, and then everyone respond back, and then whatever feedback you get, you can send back to me, and then I'll make the final thing and send it out again. Does that work? So Monday. I'll have
Megan,
done
that
with
was
it.
excellent to have that to work with tonight.
Oh.
To have this as a,
Great job. And Bethany, can you say those 3 points again? Because I didn't get them all either.
So the first one was to, on a regular basis, thank you for catching that, have a joint meeting with the Town Council, Planning Board, the Affordable Housing Collaborative,
Yep.
more
Should we
the
do the
merrier.
EDC too?
With the Economic
Do we
Development
want
Committee.
economic development, because they're big into,
I mean, I think it would be helpful.
yeah.
you know?
Because I think we're all working on similar things, but separately, and it would, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the first one. The second one was to rezone all 3 surplus properties.
Yep.
Careful
And-
with your language there, because I don't think you want to rezone
Okay.
the surplus properties. I mean, it's actually an advantage for us to work with them as government institutional properties. At the end of the day, when they become residential properties, they will need to be rezoned in some way, shape, or form.
But you don't have to do that up front.
But we don't have to do that up front. And if the properties wind up staying in town ownership, they may continue to be government institutional properties. Because no firm decision has been made about whether the town is going to continue to own them or not.
So
do
the
we wanna
first
put-
action item would then be to make the decision about ownership. Would that precede rezoning?
I think what we need to do is what we've been trying to work on is getting a general form of development at the various sites. Because if we can get an answer on that from the council, then we're in a good position to put out RFPs to solicit ideas from the development community. And we don't want to make it too specific, because we want to allow people to bring creativity to the table. But we do need the council to vote on what that general vision looks like.
So,
Yes.
so we're going to say vote on each property, a vision for each property. How are we going to what are the terms?
We need a decision from council on what this development looks like that's firm enough to allow staff to run with that in a request for proposals for development. That's really what we need. And we met as a staff the other day. It may simply be, right now, the best thing to do is to argue, to say, let's move forward with South Road, because that seems to be the property that seems to have the most momentum behind it. Wakefield is really up in the air because there's so many different people arguing for different things there right now. You don't want to wait for that to get settled to do something else. Oliver Watson has its own sort of unique set of issues with sort of its remote location and everything like that, and we still are dealing with some people who have a fundamental belief that the gift to the town should be honored in terms of dealing with elderly population, even though our legal counsel has said that we've satisfied that obligation. So that may take some additional discussion. So if you want to get them to move on something, South Road, I think, is the one to focus on. It's also the biggest, best opportunity of the three, so.
So should that be specific, number 2?
Well, my memory is when we discussed, I think what I wrote it down was, rezone them, but I think what we were meaning was get the paperwork done now, right? Sort of start on the paperwork or direct staff to begin drawing up the documents that would, something like that to say, like, there's steps we could be taking now that you don't have to have the full clarity. So, Brian.
Yeah, so what we need is a vote from council, right? So we can't really just have 5 council members discuss something, and because staff is not going to act based on what they perceive as a general consensus. The council has to speak as a body, and it has to speak through a vote.
I think that the action item should say, schedule a vote for the vision for each property. Schedule a vote on the, tell them to schedule a vote.
Could they do a vote at the next town council meeting? Could they vote at that meeting? Or could they vote, do they have to have a hearing? Or could they vote at the next, could it be on the agenda for the next meeting?
So I do believe it will require an advertised public hearing
Okay.
in order for them to vote on it. So, and I'm not sure what the advertising requirement is, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
And I think they're waiting for one more meeting with Union Studios as a follow-up. Union took
Yep.
off some data, and they tried to say, when can you come back? And Union said, let us take it. We'll
Right.
get back to you on a date.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to push the final date on the final meeting with Union Studios, and then immediately following that, a vote on the housing structures for South Road, maybe.
Do we know when that is?
We don't, it's
It
not
doesn't have a
scheduled.
date.
They haven't said yet. Are
It's
they
not
working on it?
scheduled. If you remember, so Union Studio was working with a financial analyst. The
Right.
financial analyst was down with the flu when they met. So when we left that meeting, my understanding was that Union Studio was going to take their comments, refine some of the designs, and then they were going to come back for another discussion with the financial analysts present to give them advice on,
Next step.
because there are certain density issues to create the sweet spot where everything works financially. So he needs to have input, because if they say, well, we want 30 units, he may say, well, then maybe we can't make them all affordable or something like that, or the affordability things have to be higher. If you do more units, maybe your AMI can come down a little bit lower. So he needs to have a little bit of input on that discussion.
So I think the more specific we are with that, again, to pick up on what Rich said with the, to make the date for a meeting with the next meeting with Union Studios immediately followed by, and I would think we could use the language, vote to approve a vision, and maybe even say, including number of unit, I don't know, like if we wanted something more specific, and you might be able to speak a little bit more about, what specifics. But I think the more we sort of lead the town council, like a nice little checklist, maybe the more results we'll have.
Any other thoughts on our presentation?
So what are we, so on this last slide, what are we exactly saying? We're saying we want to do the joint committee on a regular basis, planning board to vote on Horsley Witten, and then this last one, what's the wording that we want to use for
So
this
I think we should say, schedule the final Union Studios presentation, and soon after, schedule a vote to approve a vision for,
Housing
sur-
vision.
a housing
South
vision
Road.
for,
Housing vision for South Road.
for each surplus
For each
property.
Yeah.
Maybe with a focus on South Road,
Yeah, like,
or an emphasis on South Road.
yeah, like I don't feel as strongly about what we specifically put on the slide, but I think like as long as we can convey the idea that it is totally fine to prioritize South Road, like that's totally fine and good, but do not completely serialize these. Like it should be, do each one as quickly as you can, get the ball into the court of the RFP process. And yeah, and so we can convey that in a few more words than whatever's on the slide. I think it would be hard to put in one bullet point, but that's,
I think what you want to say, though, is don't let questions about one site hold you back on other sites.
yeah, sure,
Right.
yeah.
And you can put out RFPs and then do nothing with them, right? I mean, so putting out an RFP does not mean that you have to choose something and you have to go down that road. But if we are putting out RFPs, why not see what we get back? Maybe they get something that they like.
So are we asking them to vote on a conceptual design that's good enough to submit RFPs? Is that what we want to come out of this? Because to me, a vision is a very loose and wishy-washy term, I think. But I don't know if there's a better term that's not going to limit our options. So somewhere there's this sweet spot that calls them to action but doesn't constrain us. And I don't know what that wording is, but I think we should try to ask them to vote on something that allows us to develop an RFP.
Yes, I would agree with that. I'm sure what the right word is, but allows us to go the next step and begin the RFP work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That the council needs to vote on something that's specific, open enough to allow us some flexibility, but specific enough to be able to create an RFP. And that we have RFPs in our pocket from places that have done it before, and we're ready to go with it as soon as the town gives us a general, the parameters. Voted on parameters.
So I wrote that down as vote on the specs of each project, or vote on the specs of the project at each site in order to develop an RFP. Something like that. Okay, so let's move along to item 5B, Old Tower Hill Road Neighborhood Plan. So discussion from the February 11th form-based code presentation to the planning board and preliminary planning for our participation in the rezoning and development process. So I don't know,
Yeah.
were you there, Josh?
I can. So, okay, so I want to preface this by saying that I do hear Brian's concern of not wanting to get too off the rails with this topic. It's possible that we don't even want to dig too far into this now. The reason that I wanted to bring this up, so we, in that February 11th presentation about Old Tower Hill Road, there was this whole, and again, this is a draft presentation, hasn't been like sent out as a directive or anything, but there's this whole set of different steps that would need to be taken in order to really implement this plan. And the Affordable Housing Committee is called out in a handful of these steps. They have a certain set of timelines basically for each, like whether this would be short-term, immediate, like long-term, et cetera. And I was curious for the ones that are the highest priority for that, like if we want to do any thinking about that now, like if you get the go-ahead from the town council that says like, yes, indeed, we want to go with one of those options, one of those 5 options that was laid out at that meeting, and we want to really make this district happen, like what are the next things to do, then it could very well look like what's on that draft list. Again, it's not final, so I don't know how far we want to dig into it, but I figured it might at least be worth discussing in case there's some, something that we want to do with it. Or at the very least, I liked your point about, having a set of people in mind who you at least want to maybe make aware of some of these meetings that are happening. So like if there's another, for example, Old Tower Hill Road related meeting where maybe you want to put thumbs on the scale for like, yes, we should do it this way. Or maybe it's just people who might be implicated in these specific points, like if this does indeed become more of a directive than just a draft. And so to make it a little bit more concrete, I can talk about the specific points that were brought up, and you guys can give me your thoughts on whether it makes sense to go through it in detail now or not. The items for those with the plan, it's 4.4.7 and 5.5.7, which are immediate, and AHC is listed. 4.4.7 was to refine housing production targets in the town's comprehensive plan and the affordable housing production plan for each income category based on the community vision for the Old Tower Hill Road study area, analyze and develop a plan to provide the required municipal service capacities necessary at those target levels. That feels like a lot more than we can do ourselves, but I think there are certain things that I could see as basically ways to sort of revisit that housing production plan, things that maybe were envisioned that did not necessarily come to fruition, ways of updating the numbers based on the new data that we have in terms of what we might need. So we could at least start taking a look at that. That I think, as I'm thinking about it, is probably like, it might be a little bit much for right now. But the other 5.5.7 is to allow mixed-use development in the study area and promote the idea to investors that residential rental housing is welcome as a part of mixed-use projects. And I think this one in particular might get into, like, are there people that we want to make sure are aware of this discussion and could be pulled in? Like, does it make sense to do any sort of outreach around the corridor? I don't know what that would look like, whether it's just sort of, flyers or actually like reaching out to people, but it seems like something that could be useful, whether it is something that we plan to do in the future or whether we want to do more proactively.
So when you say reaching out to people, you mean like possibly like talking to the business people on that corridor? And letting them know that this is happening?
I legitimately don't know what the level of awareness is there. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about these things, because I just don't know, right? It seems like they've done some level of discussion with people in the area, but I don't know if everybody who is, who's on that corridor is aware of this. Do you have a sense?
I mean, this is something that the Economic Development Committee should be focusing on. I mean, that's really their constituency. I'm making the same recommendation to them that I'm making to you, because I've already had some of my economic development people say, yeah, we should go out and start recruiting people to build. And I'm, wait a minute, we need an ordinance first. I think the best thing right now that both boards can do is to sort of spread community awareness, because, again, this is an ordinance change. It will have to go through a public hearing on the planning board. The planning board will have to make an advisory recommendation to the town council, and it will have to go through a public hearing process in front of the council. And your best bet is to make sure that this room is full of people who are willing to support this kind of development on Old Tower Hill Road, and not full of people that are going to say, I want South Kingstown in a hermetically sealed bubble, it should never change. And those people exist. So if this is something that's important to you, if you see this as beneficial to housing, then spread the word that this is in process, and the council has been pushing to see results from this project. So while I do expect there to be more time taken to advance the draft language that we currently have to a final version for the planning board to consider and move forward to the council, I do expect to see something move forward to the council probably summer or fall on this. And, you know, this is a very substantial change to zoning in this town.
Do we want to mention anything in our meeting with the town council about how we are excited about this project? Just because housing, I think, is good for all housing, it's good for everyone, right? So, and I think if we do the group meetings, right, economic development, because I think what you're saying is important, and if we can help them with what they're doing. I think it's good for everyone, right? So if we have the joint meetings, we can all work together. But do we want to mention this in our meeting and just say anything about that?
I think that when we do the housing overview part, we should probably say, you know, and thank you so much for your enthusiasm about the Old Tower Hill project. We're also very excited and hoping to stoke the enthusiasm in the businesses to want to build housing too. You know, I think we should always say, like, thank you for your, you know, continued attention. Because, I mean, they have been putting it forward. One question I have, though, Josh, what is the next thing? So let's say we're talking to a business owner on, you know, Main Street, or Old Tower Hill Road or whatever, and we're just like, hey, did you know about this ordinance change? And they're like, okay, what do I need to do next? Like, what is the next thing to do?
I don't think we really know exactly what to do next because it's not written yet, but.
I think the thing to do is to tell them, keep an eye on the town website, on the planning board agendas, or simply call the planning department. We are more than willing, and I tell this to people all the time who are trying to follow something. Call me every couple of weeks. I'll tell you exactly what's going on, and if it gets to the point where you need to call me every week, I'll tell you to call me every week. If things are changing that quickly. But for the most part, you know, right now, if you call us once a month, it's going to continue on a work session. Then it will get put on a regular session for a vote. So, and I would expect that I don't think we'll see this return on the March work session, maybe the April work session for further discussion. And then maybe April or May regular session.
I was thinking of a story that I believe Councilwoman Bergner called out from the bench. A few months ago, there was a fire in an apartment, and several workers who worked at the Chop House Grill, they all shared that apartment together, so they lost their housing. So I had seen something on Facebook saying, like, can you help rehome these, you know, it was like probably 4 people, can't remember, all employees of Chop House. And because their apartment had caught on fire, you know, now 3 workers from our local favorite restaurant have nowhere to live in here. They're going to move to Cranston and drive down, you know, I don't know, maybe they will, but I think we could use that, you know, remember when that happened, and, you know, imagine if Chop House could use this ordinance to house their own employees.
Yeah, it feels like it's sort of, I guess maybe what the takeaway from this is, you know, we've had for many meetings, I don't know if it's on this meeting's agenda, but it's sort of that recurring discussion about like best ways to do outreach. And I guess maybe that's what it boils down to, is like that's sort of the best thing we can do for now. I don't know if it's worth getting into a full-fledged conversation about it right now. It's sort of up to you all, but at the very least, I think we should be ready, like, you know, as we hear about these meetings going forward, to sort of push through our networks, like whether you are connected to social media, like, you know, if that's something you're plugged into, please push out to the people that you are in contact with. I feel like, you know, what I can offer is reaching out to the youths, the students and such, you know, maybe put something in some campus e-lists or things. But I think we should be definitely ready to do that. Like even if this happens like in between meetings or something where there's, you know, we receive notice that there's going to be a discussion about this at the next X meeting, you know, like, we should be ready to sort of send out the bat signal, so to speak, for that.
So is there information on the town website about this plan? If someone took, would they be able to find information about this?
Yes, I think there's a website specifically for the project that's linked
There
from the
is.
town website.
I have it downloaded on my phone, so I show anybody who will, I say, oh, look, did you know what South Kingstown's doing? The people in Narragansett are very excited. But, you know, I keep it on my phone,
And I've
because
been
it's just,
talking to, you know, people I interact with about it, but
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was,
oh, there's a website with all the pictures on the presentation that they did.
so it's on the town site?
Yes. Well, I go to the town site, though. I think it's hard to find. I go to the town site, and in the search engine, I write Old Tower Hill Road, and then it comes up. But, Brian, maybe you could send us the link for that?
It's Old Tower Hill Road neighborhoodplan.com.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts on this item for now? Okay, so let's move to our old business section. So we would be on 6A. And this came up towards the end of last year, and I think it would be important for us to, it kind of underpins a lot of the other stuff we're talking about. So discussion of future goals and objectives for the Affordable Housing Collaborative, including discussion of goals, policies, actions in the comprehensive plan housing element. So the housing element is several pages long, but at the end of it, in our comprehensive plan, is the Housing Action Plan Summary. And that lists specific goals. There's 3 of them, I believe. And then it's broken down into specific policies and then action steps. And so for the whole time I've been on the committee, for the last year, we really didn't use the language of the comprehensive plan, but we've been noticing other committees doing that. And since they're also going to be redoing this plan in the next, couple of years, I think it would be good to really know our piece of it so that we can update it and, see where we're still needing to focus on. This is a pretty big lift, though, so I'm wondering if we should just look at the housing action plan itself. So the housing element, if you have that first link on the agenda, I know some of us have computers, you can scroll down to the end of it. The last, I think, 4 pages is the action plan summary that actually has the language of the policies and the actions. All of the data before it is great, but we don't have to look at that necessarily tonight. What I'll do first is just read the 3 goals, which are in the block text at the top. Just because the layout of these things, it's kind of hard sometimes to even keep them clear. So if we just maybe kind of absorb what the goals are, and then we can start thinking about which policies and actions have we already addressed and which ones haven't we. Brian has an excellent tool to kind of track the progress and whether it's a long-term thing or a short-term thing. And I think we'll look at that part of it probably at another meeting. But what I'll do is just read our 3 housing goals. So goal 1 is the valued sense of place and community represented in South Kingstown's existing housing stock and traditional village development patterns will be enhanced. And I know that we've talked a lot about, investing in architecture and not having them be cookie cutter. And so obviously there's several different policies and actions, so we'll come back to that. Goal 2 is LMI housing development will occur throughout the community in a manner that is reflective of South Kingstown's residents' physical, social, and financial limitations and resources, with the goal of achieving 10% of the year-round housing stock as deed restricted for low and moderate income households. Okay, so that's goal 2. And then goal 3 is a wide range of affordable and LMI housing options will exist, developed through a combination of innovative regulatory mechanisms, public and private initiatives, and joint public and private partnerships to maintain residential diversity and to assure that local shops and offices will have a sufficient employment pool. So that was interesting too. So, I just kind of wanted to get those into our head. Are there what jumped out at you, just kind of instant reactions? Like I said, we'll go through the nitty-gritty language. We'll probably push that to the next meeting. But from those 3 goals, I actually don't even think I read these when I joined the committee. So I read them a couple months ago when we first came up with this, let's go back to our goals. And, the first one's very focused on place and sort of even historic preservation, I'll say. And that definitely has come through in comments during all of the Housing Initiative work sessions, is that people are concerned with how it looks. In number 2, I think it's worth noting to them, it would be great if we could give them an idea of, we're going to tell them that we're undercounting our units, so we're actually well below 5%, right? We're at 4.4, I think. And I wonder if we were to do a 100% affordable neighborhood housing project, like at South Road, how much do you think that would move the needle?
I don't know. So if you were going to do a development, like a Women's Development Corp building, they usually do about 40 to 42. So it would be 42 is what you would add on there. Habitat depends, right? So I don't think we're going to get 42 at South Road if that was what moved forward. But, the highest I would anticipate would be 40 to 42. So whatever that is.
So at some point, we should probably do that math and say, and even if we do the best case scenario development, we're still only, and then we can give a shout out to the, comprehensive permits, and the more they can, attract development to the area. And then the third goal really is, like, the language to me sounds a lot like economic development, like to provide a place for South County's workers. And so there's one piece in here, I just want to pull out one detail that I did notice, because in our presentation of the housing overview, Megan had mentioned that we do have an idea of how vastly the age-restricted units outnumber the family units or the single units. And one of the action items here does say, so it's action 3.9, monitor the growing trend of age-restricted LMI housing development proposals in comparison to the family unit needs identified in the comprehensive plan in an effort to make sure that the total number of age-restricted and family-appropriate LMI housing units is roughly equivalent. So we're not equivalent, we're like this, right? So that, in some ways, gives us the answer to what kind of housing do we need to focus on building.
Scroll all the way to the bottom.
It's actually right at the end, so
It's
goal
in-
3,
it's in
it's the
two
very
different
last page.
documents. It's in 2 different documents. Yeah. Yeah. Can I, before we jump to goal 3, can I jump back to 2? Because what struck me in this goal is that we're specifics to South Kingstown residents. And I don't think the objective, it's people who can't live here we want to provide housing for. So we're sort of saying we want to build housing for the people already here, but we don't. We want to build housing so people can come here.
And for residents who've had to leave.
And for residents,
Well, I was gonna say, or
right, but they're
people-
not current residents. They want to be residents.
Right.
And there's no place for them to go. So I feel like the way we've worded that goal is not necessarily what the intention of the goal is,
So
at least
who-
the way I translate it.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be my wording, but who worded, this is the developer, right? I mean, the person who developed the plan, right? We paid someone to do this, right?
I mean, we paid a contractor, but, I mean, we had input on all of the language. This was largely fully written when I started working here, and it just got carried over the line between 20 and 21.
The beginning pages have the list of the final committee or whoever, and it's several, elected officials and high-level, people. But there is at the beginning, there is a list of the specific people. I think it was when Abel Collins was town president, council president.
I mean, do we have the opportunity to change these goals? Is that part of our objective, or?
I don't think so, but I say we just do.
Well, you don't have the ability to change this comprehensive plan, but like I said, in very short order, we're going to be on to the next
Okay.
one. So you will certainly have input into saying, well, we think that we need to, massage these a little bit.
Okay.
Brian, is there you made this? Did you pull these out and make this, or is this something?
Yeah, I just clip, this was something that I did for
Historic.
Historic District Committee, so I took the same thing, and instead of grouping them by goal, I grouped them by priority.
So can we make notes in this?
If you want me to send you a Word document or something so you can mark it up, I'm happy to do that.
Maybe do we want to do that?
I like to do things on hard copy, so maybe next meeting, we should sit down with just the metric thing printed out, and we could mark it up together.
Yeah, if there's
Yeah.
anything you want ever in hard copies at meetings, just tell me and they'll be here. And I can even have them distributed before the meeting.
Because I feel like status check, that's great, but some might be in process, and if we had notes, kind of knowing where we were at, that might help.
Well, I'm not even looking at the part where we're saying in process or completed yet. I'm still just looking at the language of the goals. And then maybe the ask would be that we really read the policies and actions for next time, so that we can better judge the metric thing, the implementation table. Does that sound like a good plan? All right, so do we table this till the next time? Is that what I would say?
So I have to say, I did read through these yesterday, trying to wrap my head around so many actions to each goal was near impossible, given where I am right now. So I don't know if there's a bigger context we need to take it in within the total comprehensive plan, or, because these are out of the comprehensive plan, correct? Yes. I don't know how to prioritize them in my head in terms of, because there's a lot there, and
Okay, here's what I'd like to do then. I'm going to split it up. Let's see, we've got groups of 2. So I think for next time, what I'm going to ask is if Susan and Rich could really read Goal 1 with the policies and the actions, and just, reflect on your thoughts, your professional experiences. How about Josh and Peter take Goal 2? And just getting into the language, because it is a little too much to read for, so when we talk about the implementation table, if we're each really good on one goal, then I think we'll get farther. And then so Amy and Megan, if you and maybe me too, want to really look at Goal 3, is that the longest one? It is a lot, or maybe 2 is the longest. All right, is everybody okay with that?
I would say we could spend a lot of time wordsmithing. To me, the more important thing is to sort of extract out of that what we consider to be especially if they're going to be changing the comprehensive plan. Let's extract out what we really want to see happen and focus on that. We could try to rewrite all of this. That could take us months.
I don't think the objective is to rewrite it. So these are the implementation actions. These are the things that the town is supposed to be trying to achieve out of the comprehensive plan. So you would be way ahead of the curve to be trying to rewrite this for the next comprehensive plan. What we really need is to be able to say, look at these and say, well, have we made progress on any of these things since this comprehensive plan was finalized in 2021?
And really look at priorities within those action steps.
I think that's really where I want like your intuitions almost, of like when you read the goal, where did these 3 goals come from too? It's like, are these really our top 3 goals? So I think some of that reflection, it would be nice to pull that piece out. But also while we're assessing, okay, here's what our goal is and here's what we have or haven't done towards it. So it's like assessing where we're at and then with a mind towards how could we improve this going forward. For sure. Okay, so we'll come back to that at the next meeting. Is there anything official we have to do, Brian, to say that we'll move on to, we'll table it or we'll?
No,
Okay.
I mean, I can just leave this on as sort of an ongoing discussion. I mean, the implementation stuff should be a constant discussion.
Okay. Okay, so then we would move to 6B, transit-oriented design at Kingston Station. discussion on transit-oriented design, what it is, where it has been used, and what would need to happen to have it implemented in Kingston. So Josh, in interest of time, give us the top 3 points you want us to know about this.
Yeah, I went over, I guess, some of the specifics about this in Rhode Island, but I guess maybe I'll get a little more specific. So basically the idea is RIPTA is building out a bunch of these regional mobility hubs. There are a couple that already exist. I think the one in Pawtucket's the one, or the Pawtucket Central Falls station. The Providence, I think, is the other, and there might be one south of Providence a little bit, but I know they're trying to build out a whole network of these as part of this Transit Forward 2040 plan that, I guess, funding could be an adventure as time goes on, but they're working towards it. So the legislature, I think this was last year, basically passed this pilot program, which allows for increased density, or basically money that can be given to you if you build increased density around these mobility hubs. There have been other states and parts of the country that have been more extreme on this. The original bill was more extreme on this, but things like Massachusetts have basically explicit requirements, not like we'll give you a carrot to encourage development around like these commuter rail stations. It's like, no, you must put a certain amount of housing around your commuter rail stations. And these are, they have been resulting in new housing projects around these stations. And you can see it if you take the commuter rail up to Boston. There are tons and tons of these like relatively new housing developments around the stations. So it's a concept that I think makes a ton of sense. And so this is just Rhode Island getting with the times, I guess, and trying to build that out. So I think for now, again, because we in South Kingstown, we won't have our mobility hub for a couple of years. It's not something we can actively do besides just, again, raising awareness that it's coming. And my hope is that we can, convince, or at least like sort of open the eyes of the council to the point that they're aware of this. And then at the point where the regulations are finalized, we can sort of give another nudge. And then hopefully that's a nice indicator to say, maybe whether it's having the planning board and or planning staff in the town, like try to make a stab at actually coming up with a district that would fit this. I don't know exactly what the first step would be, but that's ultimately what's going to have to happen. So yeah, I think just paying attention to it for now and making sure that people are aware is a good first step. But yeah, it really does seem to be, like I've already talked about some of the advantages of it, but even in terms of the sort of NIMBYism conversation, I think it is really, really nice because, again, it's this sort of edge of town, kind of like a lot of industrial land over there, like near the train tracks anyway. And so it feels like a part of the town where if you were to put extra density there would probably be less opposition. I think the zoning over there it's already like, what, R20s around there or something? Like I know it's like relatively dense compared to the rest of the town.
I think it goes through a lot of zones over there. So you got R20 on Route 138 between, say, Plains Road and the railroad bridge. You got a little bit of R20 on the other side. And then I think when you get into the ag land, I think it jumps to R80. And then you have the industrial strip along the railroad right away.
Right.
Is R5 even an option?
We do not currently have an R5. Are there areas of town in Wakefield where we have lots that would be, R8, maybe as small as R5? Yeah.
I have a question about the funding because you said that they mentioned the grant. So are they competing with the Housing Authority's application? Do you know? Okay.
No, the Housing Authority is already in. So that's in Rhode Island Housing right now for this round, and they'll hopefully find out in the next month or two.
And so transit one would be applying for like a next round?
I actually don't know. So the language I got was vague, and it was that they would basically be requesting or recommending that money from, quote, the bond be put towards the program, which I took to mean the recently passed housing bond, but it could potentially be, meaning a future bond if that has already been done. I guess I was assuming it was the one that had just been passed, though.
And from what I've heard about the one that just passed, there's not really a clear path moving forward on who's managing that and how it's getting divided. So there's probably in
Yeah.
process, they're trying
There
to figure
isn't.
out what's going on.
Colin updated us
Last night.
on
Yeah.
that, and that there's some reorganization that has to happen at the state level before they start to figure out how they're going to release funds.
Well, hopefully that will make the two applications far enough apart from each other. I just would hate to say, oh, we already gave money to South County, And then my other thought was, we're talking about, this, where that whole area is, Tamaqua Museum, which is our only native-run native museum in, I think, whole southeastern New England, is going to be building a new museum on land from URI in that area. And then we have the Great Swamp Massacre area that's kind of at the end of that corridor. And so we're talking about building housing here, and we're abutting reservation land for the Narragansetts. And I just want to keep that in mind, that there's a lot of unhoused native people. And just the fact that we're in that space, where Tamaqua will be going in, there's, there's a lot of sad stories that happened there. I don't know, it's just, we're talking about housing development. I gotta think about that altogether. So wanted to put that in there. Okay, thank you so much, Josh.
Just
Anything else?
curious.
Yeah,
So how far is Oliver Watson from the train station?
walkable distance. It's right down Fairgrounds
So we
Road.
really should be looking
Yeah.
at combining those two projects together, it would seem to me. I mean, why not try to do that? Because if we do South Road, we're not going to get to Oliver Watson for a while, is the reality. So by that time, maybe this will be developed far enough out that we'll really be able to combine those two projects. Just
Yeah,
concept, way out there concept.
it could be. I think the only question would be if you want to really add that density along the road towards Oliver Watson, or if you'd prefer to kind of extend it along 138 instead. Like, I've been on the record as a zealot. I would be totally down for that. But with that said, like, it just depends what the appetite is around. And I feel like there's going to be more, like, public support for putting it around 138 and, like, not pushing too much into the other land around. But I guess we'll see. Maybe they'll love it and they'll want more of it.
I just think that they're close enough that they could be creative.
Right.
It's a ways out.
And at the very least, no, we've had this thought before about, at the very least, given that we're hoping to have this development at Oliver Watson House, like, making sure that at least they can access the station.
Right.
Like, if somebody wanted to live there who, for example, didn't have a car, and, like, they're adding all of this, new bus frequency there. That was the other thing that I don't know if I mentioned, at least for all of you here, but yeah, they're planning to add a lot more bus frequency on the corridor, like, as a part of this. So it would be really feasible, as long as, the bus takes you to work, like, as long as you can make that work to live in that area, like, including up by Oliver Watson without a car. So, yeah, it's worth thinking about.
Do we know how much the town council knows about this mobility hub
Yeah,
concept?
it's a good question. So,
They're gonna learn about it.
yeah, we're definitely gonna mention it.
Well, the reason I'm
It's-
asking is because their position around the housing out at Watson was not density.
Right.
They were inclined to go lesser,
Right.
right? But maybe with the understanding of what the mobility hub offers, it might change their orientation to density out there, at least in their current thinking.
It could.
Yeah.
It could. Again, like, my guess would be that they would say, let's stick to the main road first.
Yes.
But I'm with you. I think it would be great. Sorry. And I think my guess is that at the very least, like, because I know there have been discussions, like, they were originally going to have the mobility hub in a different place. Like, there are discussions with the university. I would imagine that the town council is at least aware of this. Like, I want to say I saw. Was there one of the council members who was at the presentation in November? Either that, or it was like a state rep or something. But
A few of the council members have also met with, like, the president of URI, but
Yeah.
I sometimes wonder if the details are fuzzy. So I think that
Could
they
be.
will be learning a lot about it, and I think the more we can keep on saying regional mobility hub, Kingston, that will definitely help.
yes.
Anything else on this agenda item? Okay, so let's go to number 7, staff update and planning department activities. Brian, do you have anything for us?
No, I think between the last meeting and all the discussions today, I think I've gone over everything that we have that's new. So that last time we discussed the apartments in South County Commons, we discussed the development out on Fairgrounds Road at Norpac Schneider Electric. Those are the biggest things to have come in the door. We do have development that's nearing approval for preliminary plan at the intersection of Stony Fort and Old North Road. That's 39 single-family houses. We'll have a comprehensive permit, so it'll have 10 affordables in it. And those are all the biggest housing projects that we have right now. And other than that, nothing new to add beyond what we've already discussed.
Do you know what the AMI is for those ones in Stony Fort?
I can try and look it up right now, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
So that would bring us to number 8, which is recurring discussion topics. Brian, if we are able to, it probably would make sense to delete item 8 from our agendas just in general. I don't know that we ever really, we've already talked about all of our recurring discussion topics, because I know we were talking about streamlining the agenda, so I'd say that one can probably go. And then for 9, for new discussion issues and future agenda items, this is where I'd like to come back to my little get to know you question, which is probably over this meeting and next, if we could each share a South Kingstown housing story, your own or somebody else's, that made you want to be on the committee. So in our last couple minutes, Sue, would you mind? Do you prefer Sue or Susan? I forgot. Doesn't matter. Okay. Yeah, so just tell us why you want to be on the committee.
So I think when we went around last week and introduced ourselves, I said, I've been in this town for 24 years, but my husband went to South Kingstown High School, and my mother-in-law graduated from South Kingstown High School. My in-laws bought property in the 50s, and it was the Champlin Farm. They owned the farmhouse, and they spent their entire lives restoring this beautiful home that was built in the 1700s. I mean, pre-Revolutionary War. And so I live on Mittendorf Road. That's the other thing. They got the town, they actually weren't supposed to come down with the water, and they came down when they put in the town water and got to name the road after them. My father-in-law was a South Kingstown police officer for 30-plus years. So I saw her buy property a little at a time on that street. They bought the old farmhouse, they bought the land across the street, there was maybe an acre, and they bought it from different people. Actually, and at that point in time, they held mortgages for, the person they bought the property, Mrs. Beersford, I remember that name, held the mortgage for them. And again, their whole life was restoring that farmhouse, and then she bought, probably for thousands of dollars, an acre and a half, where I live in the house that his grandparents built. So they've passed, my in-laws have passed, my husband unfortunately passed as well. But what I saw happen in the last 2 years, and for whatever reason, my sister-in-law and at that time husband sold the old farmhouse to a couple that, was going to, wanted the old house and wanted to keep it, and then for some reason decided to demolish it. That absolutely broke my heart. It's still, there's this big fancy house sitting where that, again, it was all a farm community. And I think that gets lost, and I see now it is amazing what my house is valued at as opposed to what Dennis and I bought it for all those years ago. So that's kind of, and I'm watching, I live in this, Snug Harbor, East Matutic area, and I just keep saying, where do we go from here? How can these values keep going up and up and up, and, and so anyway, that's kind of my connection to the town. It's more my in-laws' history, but I've always, and then getting involved in Habitat, and I see the next generation, we were able to go, I didn't have a huge job, my husband worked at Almex, but we could afford to buy a house. That doesn't happen
And
anymore.
around what time period was that, say it again, that your relatives were buying the property?
Oh, that was in the 50s.
Okay.
It was funny, she was kind of the brains in the operation. They bought the old house, and then they would buy another piece of land. So at one point, they owned all of, it has since been sold. I'm the last Mittendorf on Mittendorf Road, but, so it's kind of that, I have that connection, which I would like to see other people be able to come in and live in this beautiful town, wonderful community that, other than the people that, my neighbors who live in Connecticut that rent to college students and Airbnb.
I was going to ask, what did they build in the place of the farmhouse? Is it a year-round residence?
Oh, yes, they are, I will say, and they're Rhode Islanders, so it wasn't like they came from.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's kind of my connection to wanting to have more affordable housing in the town.
Rich, if you don't mind, we'll just go around.
So I would, I guess I would connect it with two things. One, certainly but it's not, well, part is South County specific, part is not. I bought my home here 25 years ago. And at that point, I was equating, I grew up in East Greenwich, moved away, lived in New Hampshire, lived in Massachusetts, moved back here to work for American Power Conversion. I went from my first house purchase being $56,000 40 years ago, which was a stretch, okay, at my income level, making less than $15,000 a year. And when I moved down here, looking at housing prices, and I mean, certainly the years had turned, but growing up in East Greenwich, it was sort of at that point, it was considered a wealthy community. Although I didn't grow up wealthy. I wasn't one of those that was in that category. And then South Kingstown was just always where you went to the beach. So when we moved back here, we decided we were gonna live in South Kingstown because our kids were going into 8th grade and 9th grade. 2 tough years of transition for kids at that age, for sure. So when we were first starting to look at real estate, we were looking at different places, trying to figure out, what we could afford. And as I finally came upon the house where I live now in South County Hills, I thought I had actually kind of stumbled upon a gold mine, because I thought the pricing was way below where it could have been, given the area that it's in, given where I was coming from in the middle of the woods. And so everything there worked out, but I kind of roll that tape forward, and what I see happening now is a large portion, or too much of the real estate is either being purchased by people who don't live here and come here 2 to 3 weeks out of the year for the summer tourist season, and then either rent the rest or just shut it up, or is being purchased by large real estate corporations and then using it for rental properties, because that's an issue that's happening across the country as well. And so as I started to look at that, and 5 years ago getting involved with Habitat, I really came to the realization that the housing problem is much bigger than I even ever imagined it was. And having spent my last 5 years working with Habitat, the realization is even more than what I ever understood. So it just kind of brought me to the fortunate opportunity was I retired 5 years ago, so I needed something to do. And I love to build, so I started working with Habitat, and then I really started to get a sense for not only what that need was, but the opportunities it created for the people that were able to realize that need at an affordable level. And I just think it just kind of resonated with me, and so I think my objective was where I have an opportunity in either in town or in other cities to change that while I'm still able, then I might as well spend my time doing that.
Yeah, so I'm definitely newer to the town. I came here in 2021 to go to grad school, and it was interesting. So I was living in Madison, Wisconsin before this. I'm originally from Massachusetts. In Madison, I was living on the lake. We had a nice back porch on the lake. There were kayaks. I was less than a mile from the Capitol building in the center of downtown. Like, absolutely fabulous location. Buses everywhere. Like, I could walk to a bus that would take me directly to work, which was like 15 miles away, and there was a direct bus there. Like, it was perfect. And, excuse me, I was paying, when I first moved there in 2017, I was paying $490 a month to live in that house. I had 3 roommates, but it was still $490 in that location was incredible. By the time I left, it was $550, which is still like incredible. And UC Madison is building houses like crazy. It was constantly like they were building apartment buildings and new housing. And still there, like their prices were maybe less than the coast, but they were still noticeably going up. But when I moved from there to here, like, it wasn't even a question of price. It was like, it took months to even find a place where I could go. And then when I finally found the place, it was something like I think I was paying $925 or something with a couple roommates, when I first got here, which, especially now, as my landlady has been generous and hasn't really raised the rates much, I'm still paying a bit under $1,000. It's actually probably below market, and I'm in a really, really lucky location, but it's still like something that not everybody that I go to school with has had the luck to be in. And I know from reaching out to some people like at URI for stats about this, I think it's 1.5% of grad students live on campus, and I think all of them basically are in the very decaying grad village. So basically everybody who comes to Rhode Island has that same experience of they can't live on campus, they try to find housing in the community has a huge housing crisis. Even without the school, they would probably have a huge housing crisis. And so like there's just not enough space to go around. And so most people end up with really like suboptimal living situations with like, either just way too small space, or the place is in really rough condition, or they're having to move like actually twice a year because they can do it for the academic year and then they got to find something else to tide them over in the summer. So some of my interest in the housing is coming from that whole experience of like very much having the Band-Aid ripped off of seeing how bad the housing situation is. But yeah, I think some of it as well for me is I'm very much very, very into the environmental movement, and the more you pay attention to housing, it's environmental benefits is one of the many like kind of facets of life it helps. It's like anything from like financial stability to healthcare to like really you name it. But the benefits of keeping people living closer together for the environment are really, really big. So that's one of the other things that sorts of draws me to it, is that you can help people improve their lives while helping us collectively improve like the world's longevity, which I think is a really noble goal and something that even professionally I want to work towards. So yeah, that's about where I'm coming from.
Just get a planning certificate while you're at it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Peter, do you want to share?
Sure. So I would put it into 3 buckets. One is that I am a member of the Peacedale Congregational Church, which has a really long history of developing affordable housing. And so I feel like I should carry that forward as representative from the church, I guess. The second thing is my wife did work for Habitat for a period of time. And in that process, I went to any number of openings when they would open a house for a person. And it occurred to me that that was getting more and more difficult for them to do in a place that really was convenient for people. So there is this poor kid, Anthony, that goes to our church who's now a teenager, and Anthony lives out in the middle of nowhere in a Habitat house. But my wife takes him back and forth, from after church activities, and it's probably 20 minutes out of town. So we need to have more housing in town and around town that's walkable, usable. And then I guess the third thing is I worked for the YMCA for my professional career, but I had the advantage of working at a summer camp that provided me year-round housing, which was terrific. But the Y is not noted for its spectacular salaries, and so my contemporaries who didn't work at Camp Fuller really struggled to live in the community they were working in as a YMCA staff member, and it just made me realize that strata of professionals or people in that income bracket are completely outpriced in this community. So,
just quick question about AMI levels. YMCA staffers, would you say make 40,000, 50,000, 60,000?
well, they go everywhere from. They go everywhere from $15 an hour to professionals that have been in, that are making, say, $60,000 or $70,000 a year. But that's kind of the top level. And even in this community, the executive director of the South County Y is probably somewhere, maybe a little bit more than that right now. But that's, she's the executive director, and she can probably barely afford to do that.
So this is important because when the council members talk about starting at 80% AMI, if professionals in the community are making 60 or 70,000,
Right.
just a note.
Yep.
Thank you
Yep.
so much. I love the stories. Amy.
It's hard to have anything to add to all those. And I share all of the deep concerns. And I guess just individually, I became more aware. I've always had a social justice, social awareness sort of perspective of life. Then I worked in community nursing in the poorer parts of Rhode Island, Pawtucket, Providence, Central Falls. And I did that for 15 years as a home visitor. So it really shed a lot of light on the struggles that people had in a very personal, way. And so that's just grown, especially as my kids sort of got on their own, and I could think a little bit more about the world around me. It just became a very emotional draw for me to try to. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to think about people not being able to build a house, to buy a house, to afford a home on a regular salary. It's just so. Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin. But I think the reason why this all started was because I lived in North Carolina with my husband and my children. We had a nice home. The market tanked, and like a lot of people my age, they were underwater in their homes. My husband got an opportunity to come up here for work, and my parents live here, his family lived here, and we decided we were going to do it. So we ultimately had to do a short sale on our property. We did finally get rid of it, which was amazing. But we did a short sale knowing that we were coming back up here, weren't going to be buying anything anytime soon. I did not understand, and this was back in 2009. And I didn't understand what it looked like up here. My aunt let me live in her beach house with my family, and we lived there during the school year because she rented out to students. And then in the summertime, we'd move back in with my parents, and we did that for 3 years while all of our furniture was in storage. And we just kept going back and forth and back and forth. And honestly, we made a decent salary. It wasn't there's no availability for year-round housing. And at that point, I want to say if we found a year-round house, it was probably going to be $2,500 a month, and that was just ridiculous at the time. So fast forward, my husband met a gentleman who was so kind, and he said, my wife is making me crazy. Can we like, do you know of any year-round housing? And he said, I actually have a house. He helps out people in the community, and he said, I have a beautiful house that I'll rent to you. Pay me what you can afford. Wow. So, I mean, I don't know what you say to that. So, I felt really, really guilty. But a beautiful home. We lived there for 5 years. We're able to save money. I think we started out paying, $1,400. His fiance at the time, Melissa. Oh, yeah. She was in real estate, and I was on the real estate things, looking and looking and looking for housing, looking for everything. And my husband said, why don't you get into real estate? So she was in real estate. I started getting into real estate, and I just realized there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. So I am a real estate agent. I help people buy $2 million homes. And I also work at the Johnny Cake Center and can't find any homes for anyone. So it's just become a passion of mine, and I think everyone should be able to have a home where they feel safe and where they're not cost burdened and all of their money is going to rent, where they shouldn't have to make decisions on food and all of those things. But I also realized that if I did not have the help of this one angel, I would not be living, and I had my family as well. I had all of those things, but if I didn't have the help, we wouldn't be living where we're at today. So I'm grateful for that, but I also realize that so many people in our community don't have that, and I think that that's why I'm so passionate about, AMIs, especially below 80% AMI, because there are so many people who need help, and they're working, and they're making $40,000, $50,000 a year, and they cannot afford to live anywhere here, and the options aren't here either, so.
Great story, though, seriously. Thank you.
You're going to share yours, yeah, right?
I will, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, mine's actually pretty similar to Megan's because I actually grew up in Kingston, right? So my father works at URI, so I grew up in Kingston and was very fortunate when I was in my 20s that my parents helped me buy a condo down the street from them, so the old Millard Fillmore Perry house that's like a restored Victorian, beautiful. And so I lived there for a couple of years, eventually met my husband, and when I got pregnant unexpectedly, I now have 4 kids, I got pregnant unexpectedly with my first. I knew that it was not a child-friendly space because it's all professionals and it was quiet and stuff. So I was like, I want to be in a house. I know I want to be in a house. So we rented the condo without finding a place to go, just thinking, I know I don't want to be in this apartment. We're going to move into a house. And we couldn't find anywhere to move into. And it was terrifying. We ended up going into a winter rental in Green Hill Beach, where I had my first child in the bedroom there. I had a home birth. And we then could not find a year-round rental. We came right down to the last minute. And I remember the last few weeks in our beach house, just going to bed every night with my infant, and my husband, and he's also a hard worker, he's an electrician. I worked in social services. And just feeling like the worst parent ever, because I was like, I have nowhere to take this baby. Like, I totally failed. I rented my condo, and we did luck into a year-round rental at a reasonable price, but we had 2 more kids in that apartment and got the cold shoulder and did not get our lease renewed after 2 years there. But thankfully, we had begun purchasing our house, but because the apartment we were in West Kingston didn't want us there with our now 3 kids, they wouldn't extend our lease to cover up until the point where we moved into our house. So we were homeless for 2 months and moved in with my parents. And when I started telling people that this is what we were doing, so many of my peers who live and work in this community said to me, oh, I've had to do that too. I've had to go to campgrounds in the summer and then winter rentals and done that for a couple of years, all while their kids are going through South Kingstown school system and they're working in our community. They're, It's just mind-boggling because I think all of us kind of found that our little experience is really replicated over and over and made all the factors are kind of driving it together. So we did get into our house. We purchased our beautiful home now that literally we bought right before the bubble bubbled. And so now we barely scraped it. We used the FHA mortgage. We just barely got it then. So we would be totally not competitive now. But just the incredible relief that housing stability brought. My 2 kids who had to move around, we moved our 2 oldest 5 times before we ended up in the house we're in now. And my 2 oldest ones who moved around have the hardest time with routines and they have more behavioral stuff. And I just feel like things were not stable for them. The 2 youngest kids who were both born in the house that we're now in, because I had home births for them too, they just there's a stability to them that I'm frankly jealous of, because I'm like, I know that we were lucky to have this, and it shouldn't be a matter of luck just to have a basic, stable life, you know? We can do better than that, and South Kingstone is going to do better than that. So with that, do I hear a motion on the floor? We need a motion to adjourn. Let's see. Okay, so we've got Amy, motion to adjourn, Peter, second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So at 8:15, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.